All right, let's dive right in to the heart of Indian state government, shall we? The chief minister. This one's going to be particularly insightful for our UPSC aspirants out there, but honestly, anyone who wants to get a better grasp on how their state really works will find this fascinating, I think. We're going to be dissecting an excerpt. It looks like it's from a textbook on Indian polity, all about the CM.
Yeah, it's like we're looking under the hood of a powerful engine, you know? The chief minister, they really drive the state's agenda, make these key decisions, and ultimately represent millions of people.
Okay, so let's unpack this a bit. First things first, how does someone even become chief minister in the first place? The source mentions that the Constitution doesn't seem to have like a rigid set of rules, which seems a bit odd, don't you think?
It's true. It's definitely more about the art of politics than a strict recipe. Think of it this way, you know, after those state elections, the leader of the party that gets the most seats in the Legislative Assembly, that's the state's lawmaking body, for anyone who's just joining us, they're usually invited by the governor to form the government.
So it's all about who has the numbers then, like a popularity contest in the assembly, basically.
Exactly. Now, the governor, they do have some discretion, right? But it's not like they can just go picking anyone they like. They need to make sure there's going to be a stable government. So they usually go with the leader who can show they've got majority support.
Right. That makes sense. But, okay, what happens if there's no clear winner? Like, what if no single party gets a majority?
Well, that's when things can get a little more interesting, I'd say. It becomes a bit of a political puzzle. The governor might invite a coalition of parties, you see if they can try and form a government together. Or, you know, if no stable arrangement seems possible, they might have to call for fresh elections.
Wow, so the stakes can get pretty high. And the source mentions this 6-month rule thing. Can someone actually be the chief minister without even being elected? How does that work?
Well, yeah, it's a little bit of a unique quirk of our system, you could say. Picture this, okay? You're chosen as CM, you're leading the government, making all these big decisions, but you've only got 6 months to win a seat in the assembly yourself.
Oh, wow. So talk about pressure. You're basically running the show while you're campaigning for your own job.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's say we've got a CM in place. Now what? What exactly do they do all day? The source uses all these terms like powers and functions. Can we break that down a little?
Sure. So think of the chief minister as like the CEO of the state, right? They're the head honcho of the Council of Ministers, which is basically like the state's cabinet. And they decide who gets which ministerial portfolio, things like education, health, finance, you know. It's a pretty big deal because those decisions really shape the direction the government is going to take.
So it's not just about handing out fancy titles. The CM actually gets to build their team and set those priorities for the state. That's a lot of influence.
Oh, absolutely. And don't forget, the CM can also ask a minister to resign or even advise the governor to just dismiss them entirely. It's really about maintaining control and making sure everyone's, you know, on the same page.
Now, we've mentioned the governor a couple times already. What's the deal with that relationship? It sounds like they have to work together, but they also have kind of separate powers.
It's a very complex dynamic, that's for sure. Sort of like a dance, I'd say, with carefully choreographed steps, but also some room for improvisation. The CM is supposed to keep the governor informed about all the important stuff, advises them on things like, appointments and such. But the governor does have some independent powers that can sometimes create some, tension.
So it's a partnership, but one with some potential for, some serious friction, right?
Yeah.
Especially if they have totally different viewpoints on a big issue.
Exactly. It's this balance of power that's literally enshrined in our Constitution. And speaking of the Constitution, you know, it might be worth taking a closer look at some of the key articles that define this whole relationship.
Okay, listeners, get your highlighters ready. This is the kind of detail that our UPSC folks need to know inside and out.
Yeah.
And for everyone else, it's kind of a cool peek behind the curtain of how your state government actually operates.
Yeah, so the source, it points to Article 163, and that basically sets up the whole Council of Ministers thing, you know, with the chief minister right there at the helm. Their job, you see, it's to aid and advise the governor. But here's the thing. It also says the governor can use some powers at their own discretion.
Okay, so the CM gives the input, but at the end of the day, the governor can just make certain decisions on their own. That sounds like it could cause some serious conflict if they're not exactly seeing eye to eye.
Yeah, you got it. And then you've got Article 164. And that one, it kind of reiterates how the CM is appointed by the governor and that other ministers, they're appointed on the CM's advice. But hold on, it also says that ministers hold office, get this, during the pleasure of the governor.
Pleasure of the governor. That sounds kind of ominous. No. Can the governor just dismiss a minister whenever they want? Or even the whole council?
Well, not quite. It's not that arbitrary. Think of it more like a safety valve, you know? The expectation is that the governor is going to act responsibly and not just out of personal whims. But it does give them some leverage, right, if there's a lot of political turmoil going on or if the relationship with the CM has really broken down.
So it's all a very delicate dance, right? They need to cooperate, but they each have their own special moves they can pull out if things get a little tricky. What about Article 167? I think the source mentioned that one too, didn't it?
Oh, yeah. Article 167, that one's all about communication. Basically says the CM has got to keep the governor in the loop about pretty much everything, decisions, any laws that are being proposed, anything the governor wants to know, basically. It's about making sure things are transparent and that the governor has all the info they need to exercise their powers properly.
Okay, so let's shift gears for a sec and think about this from the perspective of our UPSC folks out there. Imagine you're in that exam hall, and a question pops up about the relationship between the CM and the governor. What are some key things you want to remember?
Ooh, good point. UPSC, they love to test if you really understand these little nuances, First thing, remember it's a partnership, but with checks and balances built right in. Highlight that the CM's role is as an advisor, but also make sure to mention that the governor has independent powers too. And don't forget to mention those crucial articles we talked about, 163, 164, 167. They basically outline the framework for all their interactions.
Excellent advice. Now, for all our listeners who aren't taking the UPSC, let's think about it this way. Let's say you're the CM. You're facing some big decision. Maybe it's a controversial new policy or, I don't know, a crucial appointment. And the governor, well, they have a different view. How would you navigate that situation? How do you balance what the people want with the governor's constitutional authority?
That's a really great thought experiment, actually. It really shows you the real-world implications of this whole complex relationship.
For sure. Okay, so let's move on from the governor for now. Let's talk about the chief minister's role in the state legislature. This is where the laws are made, right?
You got it. It's like the parliament, but at the state level.
Yeah.
And the chief minister, being the leader of that majority party, they have a huge influence on what happens there. They're setting the agenda, introducing those bills, and basically guiding that whole legislative process.
So the CM doesn't just put laws into action, they're actually involved in creating them.
Right. And remember, they can also recommend dissolving the assembly entirely, which basically means, calling for fresh elections. Pretty powerful tool, if you ask me.
Wow, so they can actually trigger a whole new election cycle. That's amazing.
Yeah.
What else does the source tell us about the CM's role? If it feels like we're just scratching the surface here.
Oh, there's so much more, trust me. The chief minister, they're not just stuck in meetings and dealing with lawmakers all day. They play a key role in planning the state's development too,
Oh, right, of course. The State Planning Board. That's a big one. Can you maybe elaborate on that for our listeners?
Sure. Basically, that's where the whole roadmap for the state's future is drawn up, The CM, they chair this board and they bring together all these experts and officials to figure out policies for economic growth, infrastructure development, social welfare schemes, all that. It's really about setting a vision and then making sure the resources are there to achieve it.
So it's not just about running the government day to day. It's about thinking long term and strategically shaping, where the state's going to go.
You got it. And we can't forget about the CM's role on that national stage, too, They represent their state in meetings with the prime minister, other central government officials, that kind of thing, always advocating for their state's interests and pushing for those policies that are going to benefit their people.
So it's like they're a diplomat for their state almost, negotiating for resources, projects, and just getting attention from that central government.
Exactly. And, in times of crisis, whether it's a natural disaster or some kind of public health emergency or even social unrest, the CM often becomes the face of the state. They're the ones leading those response efforts, reassuring the public, and coordinating with all the different agencies.
So it's like being a captain, steering the ship through rough waters. I imagine those are some of the most challenging times for any chief minister.
Oh, for sure. It takes a really unique combination of leadership, decisiveness, empathy, and definitely communication skills.
So we've seen how the chief minister's role goes way beyond just sitting in their office. They're shaping those laws, planning for the future, representing their state on the national stage, and leading the charge when times get tough. It's a multifaceted and really demanding job, I'd say.
It really is. And While that source we're looking at today provides a pretty solid overview, it's important to keep in mind that the CM's role can change a lot depending on the specific political context, the personalities involved, and of course the unique challenges that their state is facing at the time.
That's a great point. No two chief ministers are exactly alike, right? And the way they approach governing can be totally different.
Absolutely. And, this is where it gets really interesting, especially for our UPSC folks. You need to go beyond what the textbooks say and really analyze how different CMs throughout history have used their powers, how they've dealt with different challenges, and ultimately how they've shaped their state's destiny.
It's like studying those real-life case studies of leadership in action, looking at how different people have dealt with all the complexities of this very important role.
Yeah, exactly. And for everyone else listening, it's about understanding that the person who's leading your state government, well, they have a huge impact on your daily life, more than you might realize.
That's so true. So we've covered a lot of ground, but I think there's still one really important aspect of the chief minister's role that we need to talk about their relationship with the governor.
Yeah, let's go back to that. It's a big one.
We talked about the chief minister's powers and their whole role in the legislature, even their presence on the national stage. But that relationship with the governor, it feels like it's like this constant thing in the background.
It is. Yeah, the source mentions it, but to really, I don't know, wrap your head around it, I guess, you have to think about the history of it all. Like, back in the day, governors, they were appointed by the British Crown, right? So they were basically there to look after British interests.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and of course, things changed after independence, but there's still, that underlying tension.
Yeah.
Between the central authority and how much autonomy the state really has.
So it's not just like personalities clashing or whatever. It's almost built into the system from the get-go.
Exactly. Now, look, most of the time, things go pretty smoothly. The CM and the governor, they talk things out. They find some common ground. But when there's a real political disagreement, well, that's when those underlying tensions can bubble up to the surface.
Oh, for sure. Okay, our UPSC listeners, you guys should really take note here. This is like prime essay question territory. Imagine this. The governor uses their fancy discretionary powers to block a bill that the CM is desperate to get passed. Talk about a potential constitutional crisis.
Oh, absolutely. And it's not just hypothetical either. It's happened before, leads to court cases, political standoffs, the whole 9 yards. It just shows you how important it is for both the CM and the governor to really understand where their power ends, and to act responsibly.
It really is this constant balancing act, isn't it? And for all our listeners who aren't taking the UPSC, think about this. The governor has influence over things like, who gets appointed at universities, what the police are doing, even land acquisition for those big development projects. This stuff affects you directly.
That's a really important takeaway, I think. We tend to get so focused on what's happening in national politics, but a lot of decisions that happen at the state level, especially those involving this whole CM-governor relationship, they can have a huge impact on your daily life.
So true. All right, so we've gone pretty deep on the chief minister today, from how they get the job in the first place to all the intricacies of their powers. For our UPSC folks, remember, this is just the starting point, Go out there and dig into those case studies, compare different CMs, and see how these concepts actually play out in the real world.
And for everyone else, next time you hear about some issue that's happening at the state level, take a minute and think about the chief minister, their role, and, that whole web of relationships that they have to deal with. It might change how you see things.
Well, it's been another great deep dive. I think we've unpacked a ton. But as always, there's so much more to learn and explore. Stay curious, everyone. Stay informed. And we'll see you on the next deep dive.